Bill Donohue frustrated many with his remarks about the Charlie Hebdo attack, implying that they had brought it on themselves by offending Muslims with their imagery. And finally, the mainstream media is taking Bill Donohue to task, but probably not the outlet you would have expected. Take a look at Megyn Kelly on Fox News from earlier this week.
I understand you didn't like the message. Do you really think they were not courageous in the face of death threats to be publishing what they did?
No. I think, first of all, they're pornographers disguised as satirists. We're not talking about Mel Brooks. We're talking about the functional equivalent of Larry Flynt going to print.
Okay,
look,
but let me just stop you there. Larry Flynt himself was upheld. His right,
absolutely,
his embodiment of the First Amendment itself was specifically recognized by the U.S. Supreme Court.
That's exactly right. And I will make the point, I've made it my whole life, I'll make it again tonight. People have a legal right to insult my religion or somebody else's. They don't have a moral right to do so.
What is a moral right?
What is a moral right?
Wait, I have no idea what that means.
I can actually take down his whole thing with a literal example of his hypocrisy. He was extremely upset. Do you guys remember an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm when Larry was taking some medication, so he was peeing really strong, and he went to somebody's bathroom, and the pee splashed on a painting of Jesus.
Right. And look
now think about it. What he just said there was, this is not Larry. This isn't Mel Brooks. This is more like Larry Flynt. Well, Mel Brooks and Larry David are pretty close in their satire. So everything that this man says is complete and utter nonsense.
Case by case basis.
Good point. Good point. Yeah.
I get one every now and then.
But I like Megyn Kelly. She was being pretty strong there.
Well, this is what. So whenever you see Megyn Kelly do something like this, you go, oh, so the rest of the time she's just pretending, right? Because she is smart and she knows better and she knows how to look stuff up and she knows how to rebut stupid arguments. Yet she just chooses not to.
Yeah, and she was so ready, so prepared for what he was going to spout to her that she had an actual court case ready to read from, which I believe we have in this next clip.
First of all, freedom of speech is not an end. It's a means toward an end.
No, it's also an end. It's also the very freedom itself.
That's certainly not the understanding of Madison.
Yes, listen, a quote from the U.S. Supreme Court. In fact, here, you know what I'm quoting to you from? Hustler Magazine and Larry Flynt versus Jerry Falwell. This is the Supreme Court case in 1988. The freedom to speak one's mind is not only an aspect of individual liberty and thus a good unto itself. They recognize that the actual ability to speak, to say these things, is a good unto itself, but is also essential to the common quest for truth and the vitality of society.
Right. I would prefer the Madisonian understanding, which also says this: liberty can be lost by the abuse of power, but also by the abuses of liberty. Self-censorship is the friend of freedom, because if we don't have self-censorship, we're going to have individuals interpret their rights in an extreme fashion.
But Bill,
that leads to basically a license at that point.
People have accused you of blaming the victim that this is the equivalent of blaming a rape victim for being dressed too provocatively, saying she brought it upon herself. No. Just because they did something provocative doesn't mean they invited what happened.
There's a difference between a justification and an explanation. I'm trying to explain the totality of what's going on here.
He's doing a pretty poor job of it.
Madisonian.
I'll
take the Madisonian view.
Yes.
Good.
Self-censorship is the friend of liberty or freedom. Yes, self.
Yeah.
Self, not you, not external, not the government, not the religious people, not the Catholic Church. Self. And if that self doesn't want to exercise censorship, they don't have to. That's the beauty. Yeah. And, you know, it used to be what's offensive today is not tomorrow. What was not offensive today might be tomorrow. It used to not be offensive to make gay jokes. And now it is offensive, right? Yeah. So what used to be offensive to have a black guy and a white guy kissing, or a black guy and a white woman kissing on television, that was a scandal. Well, that's not offensive anymore. So to say that so we need to have that freedom to offend, because that's how you progress. That's a progressive view of, and that's how societies evolve. And what they're making the case for is to have less evolving, is so we could stay a little bit more ignorant, be a little bit more afraid of ideas, because ideas hurt.
You know, get a real Catholic, man.
And he's not a real Catholic.
He's not a real Catholic. You know, he doesn't represent the church. I mean,
no. The Catholic League, it's invented, it's nothing.
Right, it's nothing. It's a nothing thing. It's just, and continually news organizations, really just Fox. But he's been on CNN plenty.
And MSNBC.
They just continue to put this
you don't hear too much from him recently.
On the, no, not as much recently, because he's a guy, he's a hired hand to be on television.
Yes.
He's a mental lightweight. He's bad for the country. He's bad for America. Do your job. Keep him off TV. Let him wither away. Spend his last 20 years in silence.
He's like the 3% of climate scientists who don't accept climate change as a thing, right? So they always got to find, who's the crazy guy who still hates gays? Bill Donohue. Get him. We'll get him. He's still backwards about everything.
Right.
Get him. So we got to have that on the panel, and that's why he gets on TV.
Right, which is not how TV ought to work, but
it is exactly how it works.
So in a weird way, he's kind of jealous of their ability to not post the pictures, right? Like that's what he wants for Jesus too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like he's taking the point where he's going, I'm going to say this because ultimately what I want is for Family Guy not to be able to put Jesus on, right?
Yeah.
That has to be his
To not
play
pee on
there,
Jesus.
which I don't think the average Catholic person thinks. So
no,
he doesn't.
certainly not.
Yeah.
He doesn't. Yeah.
You hear a lot of people too in the news recently saying, like they'll have spokespeople come on and say, there's limits to free speech. That the New York Times would never run an anti-Semitic cartoon in there. But that's still, they're exercising self-censor. That's not the law. People are trying to believe they would never do that. Yeah, but that's not the law, right? They could if they wanted to. And if there was an anti-Semitic cartoon that was the centerpiece of a huge news story, I'm sure they would print it. So they would show people this is the thing that's causing all the problem. We don't endorse this anti-Semitism. They print if someone, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The telling the news story, journalists should be exempt from all this when telling a story.
Yes.
That's why we need to see the cartoons in telling the story because it's part of the story. I remember
You mean exempt from criticism if they show it?
Yeah, exempt from serious criticism. Like if you're telling the story, that's a huge part of the story. I remember when Robert Byrd, the late senator from West Virginia, who'd had an ugly past with being in the Klan, right? But he came around and he was on the right side of
Yeah, he
civil
started
rights.
calling white people N-words.
Right, so
That's how he came around.
So he did an interview and he said, well, when I was growing up, the word was used all the time. He said we'd call somebody a white. Right.
N-word.
And then
Wait, are you not going to exercise your own theory?
No, I'm not going to do it.
Self-censoring.
I'm using self-censorship because I think you could tell this story without using the exact word. So anyway, so it was described then in every news story. I was living in Washington, or at least visiting Washington when this was happening, in the Washington Post, and I'm trying to read story, and I'm like, what the fuck did he say? Because everything would say, and then he used a racial slur, and I'm like, what racial slur? You can tell me. You can print it. You don't have to be afraid.
Yes.
You're quoting him. You're telling me the goddamn story. And they wouldn't do it. And it was like, and I didn't have the internet or whatever. It was incredibly frustrating. It's okay. It's okay. Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
You can report what they said.
If you can show pictures of the Holocaust, I'm sure you can show that he used the N-word inappropriately.
Yes, that's right. You can, and if you need to, you can leave word spaces out. Like, I got that. That's okay.
N ...
R.
Yeah.
Solved.
R.
Solved.
Exclamation.
Yeah, right.